All right. So, since you came up with the joke, do you want to go ahead and intro the show?
Yeah, sure. Welcome to Shoot the Cork. No, I'm gonna say it's Urkel. No, welcome to Shoot. All right, that's just. It's just somebody laughing. We added our own laugh track. All
Did
right.
I do that?
Oh, jeez. Welcome to Shoot the Corecast, the official companion podcast to the RF Generation Shmup Club. This is a family-friendly shmup-themed podcast that, like Dr. Strangelove, learn to stop worrying and love the bomb. This is Addicted, and with me I have...
MetalFRO, also known as the Game Boy Guru. And as Addicted mentioned, we are part of RF Generation. RFGeneration.com is the website we're affiliated with, and it's a great place to be online because we have a huge database where you can catalog your game collection. We have a great front page with articles and videos created by myself and other contributors to the site. And we have great forums where we have the Shmup Club and the other monthly playthrough hosted by Single Banana and Grey Ghost 81, and lots of other topics. Along with some new stuff that's going on with some top 20 lists that are being made by Easy Racer. And so lots of cool stuff going on there, plus the Discord channel that we chat in. So please go check it out. It's all free to use at rfgeneration.com.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff to check out while you're in quarantine.
Yeah, right.
All right, as always, we have a question of the month, and this month's question is, what shooting game do you feel is so close to greatness, but just misses the mark, and why? And the first response that we have here is from Crabmaster, also known as @Kelsey Polnick. Not a popular opinion, but Life Force for me. I really dislike some of the design choice for levels in that game. I'm going to have to hit him up and hear what he thinks of some of those Life Force levels. Maybe he just doesn't like the beginning level with the brain on there, or what? Is there anything in there that stands out to you in Life Force?
Not specifically, but it's been a while since I've really put some time into it, so I'd probably have to go back to it and give it a playthrough.
Sounds like a challenge for Shmup of the Month to me.
Yep. JB, at Need New Shorts, he says, Gradius I love, but I suck at it because it's so difficult. And maybe that's not a design flaw as much as just me sucking. Well, that was a little bit different take on the question there.
And I have to say that, rest in peace, but I have to say, Gradius was definitely hard, and part of the design team, that was the impetus for the creation of the Konami code.
Yes.
So it's not just you. It is a hard game. You do, with that Gradius syndrome, you keep going and going and going, and then you make a mistake, and then you press reset.
Yep. Yeah, and actually Crabmaster responded to JB and said, I almost wrote Gradius as well. To recover after a death really hurts it a lot for me. And yeah, Gradius syndrome is real. We've mentioned that many times.
Oh, yeah. I rank it right up there with PTSD caused by playing too much 1942. All right, the next one comes from @CollectorCast, Zanuck Cross Zanuck, because not enough people ever got to enjoy it. And I have to say that is entirely true. Zanuck Cross Zanuck, even though it's prohibitively expensive, and I think it's still available on the PS3, the Japanese PS3 eShop, is one of the best Xenic games I have played. I was a little bit down on the NES port, and playing Xenic Cross Xenic so opened my mind. 3 different ships, so many options, such great music. It really is something that if you ever have a chance, you should give it a try.
Yeah, and I thought it was a unique answer because it's a little bit different take on the question. You know, when I threw it out there, it's like, what game to you hits on a lot of things, but doesn't quite live up to its promise, or, you know, maybe doesn't do enough stuff right so that it becomes a really memorable game or whatever. And Duke Togo took this in a different direction, so kudos to him for thinking outside of the box. Our friend Easy Racer, at @easy_racer on Twitter, he says, the first thing that comes to mind is Biometal. Good graphics, unique mechanic, and while it gets criticized for its soundtrack, those criticisms are way overblown in my opinion. Hard to place why it's not a more loved classic. Maybe needs more stage variety and better difficulty balance. So he kind of came at it from a similar angle, that, you know, there's a game that maybe hits on a lot of good notes, and, you know, the music thing is a bit of a stumbling block for some people, because of course that's the shmup that's infamous for, with the North American release, the soundtrack being replaced with a licensed soundtrack release that is essentially chiptune sample versions of 2 Unlimited, who is famous for appearing on the Jock Jams, you know, the ESPN Jock Jams CDs, and their one song being at basically every sporting event from right around 1991 or 92, whenever that came out, for, you know, about a half a decade. That song was at every sporting event.
You just had me picturing the shmup where you actually hear the NBA Jam quips instead. Just getting power up and says, he's on fire.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Or destroying the boss. Boom shakalaka.
Someone needs to make that a shmup yesterday.
The next one is from @SaturdayDevelop. UN Squadron. All the levels are great, well, except for the cave level. And UN Squadron, well, a little hint here that might be something that you want to keep an eye on for later in the year. Yeah,
possible foreshadowing.
Dun dun dun.
At Maz67086804 says, Super R-Type. Horrible slowdowns and incredibly unfair checkpoints. A debacle for IREM, especially considering the excellent R-Type 3 on the same system a few years later.
Now, was Super R-Type, that was close to launch, if not a launch game, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was a launch window game. So it kind of suffered the same fate as Gradius 3 with the slowdown, but the checkpoint thing was something new. Something new that they put into the game, because essentially Super R-Type is a bit of a redux of R-Type 2, but with a new intro level and some different stuff put into it, or I guess a retooled intro level and some different stuff put into it. And yeah, I don't think it's a bad game, but I think it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think that the slowdown came as part of the dev kits. It was just part of the built-in code. for launch NES, SNES titles there.
Oh yeah, there was probably a subroutine in there, add slowdown, or, you know, something like that.
Or you'll find out later that someone discovered if we decompile the code here, just like we did with Super Mario 64, and then we add this flag and recompile it, it runs a lot better.
Huh. Right.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Super R-Type eventually gets the SA1 hack.
Oh
like
my!
Gradius 3.
Nice.
We can make it happen.
There you go.
All right. Next one comes to us from @LordWampus. Add Gradius 3 for the Super Nintendo as a close follow-up. 2 disappointments at SNES launch. And we just talked about this, and I have to agree. It was disappointing, but when you're actually playing the game, it's pretty helpful. There, you'll find out pretty soon yourself, right, Fro, about how the SA1 helps out Gradius 3.
Yeah, I decided to, you alerted me to a copy of, a cartridge copy of a Gradius SA1 hack that was available, so I decided to spring for that. So that will be arriving in the mail hopefully soonish, and I will have the opportunity to get destroyed even more frequently in the second stage.
Sounds like we need to have you do a stream guide in.
Oh, geez. That might be a fun weekend stream of just me and a whole lot of deaths.
Sounds good to me.
At Nefarious_Wes, he says, how about Legendary Wings? Solely for the repeat bosses. And yeah, I could see that. I mean, I went through and did a 1 credit clear of Legendary Wings on NES last year, late-ish last year, for the NES challenge for RF Generation. And yeah, the repeat bosses is kind of an annoying thing, although it's not exactly the same boss every time. It's like it's the same basic framework, but they sort of make it harder and iterate on it ever so slightly. So yeah, it's basically the same boss, just harder each time you see it. But yeah, that gets a little bit old.
Same boss, but harder each time you see it. That sounds a lot like Zaxxon.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it really is an early shooting game convention that I'm glad was done away with early in the genre's life, because I really feel like unique bosses are one of the cool things that the genre brought to us during the mid to late 80s. And then, of course, in the modern era, boss fights are kind of the big set pieces in these games, and so that's one of the more focal points of a lot of the shmups today.
Yeah, it's not like the masters at Konami would ever do that, right? They never reuse bosses over and over and over again in shmups.
I think the Big Core Mark II might want to have a word with you.
Yeah, the big Core Mark II is as you allude to, there is in almost every single game there. It's like the what's, I don't know what the name of it is, but is it a Meiji Mark? I'm trying to think in the early Capcom games where they had that the circle that always gave you points that was hidden. It was in Mega Man. It was in 1942. It was in Trojan. It was everywhere in the early games.
You talking about the Yashichi?
Yashichi, thank you. Yeah, that one showed up everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, and the last response comes to us from @MarkMSX, also known as the Shmup Father. Blazing Star, the levels are too long and bloated, a masterpiece otherwise. And Blazing Star is one that I want to cover at some point, hopefully next year, because we need to get some more Neo Geo. There, or as autocorrect loves to type in Bro Geo.
Bro Geo forever.
We definitely need to do either that or Viewpoint or something within the Neo Geo realm.
Oh man, I would be down for any of those. Blazing Star would be easy enough, because I think that's available on eShops and things like that, so it's a little bit easier to acquire. You don't have to buy an AES or a consoleized MVS or a Neo Geo CD and then spend a bucket load of money to get a playable copy of the game. So,
or a Mister.
Right. So we'll have to. Oh, that's right. We'll have to think about that one for next year.
Well, I'm not before we go any further, I'm not advocating that everyone just go out and buy a Mister so they can play a game for Shmup Club of the Month here.
Right. But I mean, those of you who have it or have been thinking about it, maybe on the fence, that might just be one more reason to, to put in the pro column.
Oh, definitely.
So yeah, a lot of good responses on that this month.
So what would yours be?
Well, I don't think not to be spoilery in any way, but I think our game of the month could qualify at some level, and we can kind of expand upon that as we go along. But otherwise, for me, it's hard to say. There are a lot of shmups that I enjoy, and I think they're solid. And I don't really have anything bad to say about them. They just may not resonate with me that much when I am done playing and I turn it off. It's like, that was fun, now let's move on to something else. So, yeah, it's hard to say. There are so many what I would call workman-like shmups that are fun to play, but they don't necessarily miss the mark because they're not really shooting for the stars. They're just solid. They're just good at what they are.
They're serviceable.
Yeah, they're serviceable. Whereas there are enough games that are kind of teetering on that line between kind of bad and hot garbage. And then there are a handful that I would consider to be masterpieces, games that just absolutely do everything right. So the one that I'll say, and this is because I've had plenty of experience playing it, and I'm just going to say it's Donpachi from Cave. I like it. I think it has a lot going for it, and it set the template for a lot of what was to come. But I think Cave knew that they had something there, but they basically, I don't want to say they retconned it with Dodonpachi, but essentially, no one talks about Donpachi anymore. Everybody talks about Dodonpachi and then the rest of the games in the series. People even talk about Dodonpachi 2 B-Storm, which isn't even an official sequel because it wasn't developed by Cave. They talk about that more than they talk about the first game. And Donpachi really literally was not only Cave's first shoot-'em-up, but it was their first game. So it's historically significant. But yeah, I think there are some things that I really like about it, but I do think it kind of misses the mark because what they developed with the sequel, with the chaining and all of that stuff, there's kind of a proto-version of a lot of that stuff in the first game. There's a lot of great elements, and I think they mostly come together, but it just doesn't quite gel the same way that the rest of the games in the series, and indeed, most of the rest of the Cave catalog does.
Yeah, this is about what I expected for responses. You sort of get that formation of the idea, and then it's refined upon within the sequels, and then everyone just talks about the sequels because the idea is perfected in the sequels.
Yeah.
And that makes total sense on there. And I was trying to come up with one myself, but I think I'm going to skew a little bit away from that and say, for me, it would have to be Blazing Lasers. The game is very well done. It's just the levels themselves goes on for a little bit longer than they should, in my opinion. If they were a little bit shorter and maybe had a little bit more variety of levels, that would be a 10 out of 10 game. It's so close. But I think that after a while, you're just spending and hearing the same music and the same stuff. It just sort of grates on. Somewhere in between a Rising type shmup where you get with Strikers 1945 and maybe not quite like it's just not quite fully balanced enough for you feel like the love feels more like a trek instead of you're flying your ship through space. You know, I'm trying to say it just it goes on a little too long for its own good for all the levels.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, I think, as we talked about in that episode, each of the levels is really long. The music in each level is, I think it's good, but because the levels are so long, it repeats a lot. Now, I don't mind that on a couple of the levels because, particularly Stage 2, because I really like that track, but yeah, the levels themselves do kind of overstay their welcome, and then you get to the final level, and it's such a gauntlet that it takes... It changes the flow of the game enough that what is a bit of a slog with a few spots of difficulty going up to that final stage then just becomes a slaughter. And yeah, I think you're right. I think it's too long.
But otherwise, I really enjoyed the time I spent with the game.
Yeah.
All right, and speaking of games, let's give a brief introduction for the game for the month of February, and that was Grid Seeker.
Yeah.
All right. Grid Seeker was developed and published by Taito Corporation, and according to Wikipedia, the company was founded by Michael Kogan in 1953 as the Taito Trading Company, importing vodka, vending machines, and jukeboxes into Japan. Wonder what was the most popular? What do you think? Vodka, vending machines, or jukeboxes? I'd go with vodka.
I was going to say vending machines because they're everywhere in Japan from what I understand.
Maybe a vodka vending machine.
Yeah, well, that's a good thought.
All right. Taito started making video games in 1973, all using discrete logic hardware technology and bespoke components, which was common in early arcade games before the rise of more standardized arcade hardware. So this is stuff that you'd see that was more mechanical in nature instead of dealing with your CPU and then your centralized CPU, and then you have your RAM and stuff that you would normally expect out of a printed arcade machine with a printed circuit board or PCB attachment with your wiring harness and your monitor. It's not quite standardized stuff when we're talking about discrete logic.
Yeah, some of that hardware is pretty interesting to kind of look at.
Oh, I bet. Just sort of like with Nintendo's and or Gunpei Yokoi's, some of his designs for toys before Nintendo went full into video games.
Right.
Taito's first major success was in 1978 with the famous Space Invaders, which became a worldwide phenomenon. It has essentially started the shooting game craze, and it's still going strong today. You can still in arcades find a copy of Space Invaders. It's maybe I forget how tall is that latest one. It's pretty tall, isn't it?
Space Invaders Frenzy, yeah, and it's pretty cool. It's got a really tall screen. It's similar in size to the world's biggest Pac-Man machine, is what it's called, where it's Pac-Man and Galaga that you can choose from, and it's all based on LED lights that make the picture to make it look like large pixels. And Space Invaders Frenzy is real similar to that, where you either sit or stand behind this sort of podium, and then you hold these what are kind of like light guns, and you're shooting the enemies on screen with those.
Taito continued to innovate with shooting games throughout the 1980s and 90s, particularly with their Darius series of games, among others. And hopefully we get to do a Darius game soon.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Maybe by 2021, when Strictly Limited has shipped, or at least tried to ship, the collections it sold.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
Oh, here's hoping. Here's hoping we at least get those this year.
Yeah.
Taito also published many shooting games for other developers, notably some early toe-plan shoot-'em-ups such as Tiger Heli and Twin Cobra. In 2005, Taito was acquired by Square Enix, though it continues to operate its own brand of arcades throughout Japan. In 2018, Taito announced through Japanese magazine Famitsu that it would begin publishing games for the console market once again, as well as develop new console games. And that's one of the things I'm a little bit curious about, is since we got the announcement recently for the Darius Collection 2, I wonder if there'll be sort of a unique game on there.
That would be interesting. I mean, I know they did the new Bubble Bobble Friends, or whatever it's called. That is basically a new game. People are calling it Bubble Bobble 4, essentially. So, yeah, that would be interesting to see if that came with a new game, or maybe some kind of a remix of something, or a mashup of earlier Darius games. So, yeah, that'd be interesting.
And I'm certain there'll be some DLC, as Darius Burst Chronicles has shown us. You can really add a lot of DLC to a title.
Yep.
Alright, so Grid Seeker Project Stormhammer was released in arcades in 1992 and incorporated a mechanic known as Gyro Dive Reactive Intercept Device, aka Grid, and, well, also the game's namesake. The Grid system works similar to the Force Pod in R-Type, that it can deflect some enemy fire and can be positioned around your craft in various ways. I think the easiest way to describe this is anyone who's played Arkanoid or Breakout on there. You're basically flying your ship around and you're using the grid to catch the catch the bullets that the enemies send them. I sort of jokingly referred to this game as shmup pong.
Yes.
Because for the most part, you're always going to be with your ship at the bottom of the screen, and you're going to just be repositioning the grid system in order to try and catch as many pink, or as I've heard on Hardcore 101, bullet candy. Give me that sweet, sweet bullet candy to your ship. And the reason why you would want to do so, and we'll get a little bit more in depth in there, is the more pink bullets your grid can gets or absorbs, then the more bomb stock you get.
Yep.
Grid Seeker is part of Taito's F3 line of arcade boards, which runs the infamous Motorola MC68000 sound hardware and a Motorola 6820 CPU. Notable Taito F3 games include Rayforce, Elevator Action Returns, and most of the Puzzle Bobble series. And don't forget about Darius Gaiden. Motorola's 68K line of processors power many of the computers in arcade games during the 1980s and 1990s.
Indeed.
Would you like to start off with the creepily semi-realistic story?
Yeah. So the story, as taken directly from Wikipedia, in an alternate Persian Gulf War era, the fighting continued so much that many natural resources from the Middle East were destroyed in the process. In 1999, a Middle Eastern nation that was suffering severely from resource shortages took up arms and began attacking closer nations that were more economically sound so as to claim the resources for themselves. As the new war progressed, the aggressor nation began developing a secret weapon, a powerful military satellite with enough power to potentially lay waste to the entire world. With a weapon so powerful, conquering the holdout nations would be a task impossible to fail. The nations that escaped from the ensuing battles formed an alliance against their attackers. With the aid of a new technology known as Gyro Drive Reactive Intercept Device, GRID, the alliance takes to the skies and strikes back at their enemies in the Second Persian Gulf War. So yeah, the far-off future of 1999, as it was in 1992 anyway.
It's so far off, it's retro.
Yeah.
But you can sort of see that in 1992 when this game was made, that the possibility that there could be more and more wars in the Middle East Yeah, it's interesting, and you can sort of see why this wasn't used going forward. But it's an interesting premise for a military shooter around this time.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it from the 1992 vantage point, when the Gulf War was sort of winding down or wound down at that point, that was, I think, still fresh in people's minds. So the idea that, well, that could happen again if somebody, did a power grab or what have you, was probably not that far off. But yeah, in a lot of ways, it was somewhat prescient because obviously we have seen more of that in recent years. Although not with big mechs and, huge military machines that fly.
Yeah, and last time I checked, none of anybody's aircraft has a force pod or grid system.
Right. If only.
All right. Yeah, I used to imagine for Top Gun 2, or what's it called, Maverick on there. All right, here we go, Maverick. All you need to do is activate the grid pod and catch all the enemy bullets.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, that I can think of like Afterburner 3. Well, technically, I guess Afterburner 4. Catch all the grid. Oh, jeez.
Wow.
Too many ideas.
Yep.
Not enough time. All right, so the gameplay in Grid Seeker revolves around 3 different types of craft. Basically, you have your fast craft, your middle of the road craft, and then your slow craft, with the slow craft being able to have the highest firepower, and then the fast craft being the one with the least amount of firepower. We'll start off with the F-14 fighter jet, which is the default and is the fastest of the group, but has the weakest weaponry. Straight ahead shot. And this is where I started off with, and sort of found a little bit of a groove because it made it really easy to maneuver enemy bullets. But the problem with this is you're sort of hitting with Gradius syndrome with this choice. If you get hit or get destroyed, it's back to the pea shooter, and it's almost impossible to catch up.
Yeah.
But while you're fully powered up, it's really quick to dodge stuff and then really do some damage to this. What did your findings in this?
Yeah, it was kind of the same. I played it first because it was the default, and I liked the fast movement, but I found that early in the game, before I kind of learned the patterns and stuff, I found myself flying into bullets as much as I was catching them. So I actually needed something a little bit slower to help me balance out a little bit. So I ended up not using the fighter jet very much.
Yeah, I saw somebody playing. Originally, I was watching a long play, and I saw somebody doing this. Like, it seems possible, it looks possible, and then I realized that their life counter never went down, and I said, "They're cheating. Never mind."
Oh yes, I saw that. I saw that play on YouTube.
Now, the second craft is the AH-64F attack chopper, which has the best balance of speed and attack power. It has by default a spread shot, and I tried this a couple of times, but it's just so middle of the road where I couldn't. It didn't do anything extraordinary, so it just fell by the wayside pretty quickly, and I found myself just dealing with the stealth bomber instead. It just doesn't. Being middle of the road doesn't give you any type of advantage on there. I mean, granted, it doesn't give you any disadvantage, but for a game that relies upon you to either go full fast and you know what you're doing and anticipate the patterns, or force your way through with your powered up shot and you're overpowering with weaponry, just didn't work out.
Yeah, I took to the helicopter initially after giving up on the plane and initially finding the stealth bomber a little bit too slow. And I really like the spread shot when it's fully powered up. but it doesn't cover that much ground until it's fully powered up. And even then, I feel like it's a little bit weak. So yeah, it's just, I think you're right on the money. It's just a little bit too much middle of the road in that sense. And it doesn't quite have either enough firepower or enough speed to really do what you need to do.
And then last we have the B2AT, which I keep always thinking that there's sort of a play here called Bat Stealth Bomber.
Oh, yeah.
It's the slowest option, but has the strongest attacks. Fully powered up, has a widespread shot that can span the screen's width. And this is where I sort of went to later. Because to me, Grid Seeker is more of akin closer to R-Type. In the way it manufactured, they're all older school shmup where memorization is required. And I'm not saying they aren't on Danmaku games, but this game expects you to know what's coming up. And you either dodge it and keep flying through, again with the F-14, or with the Bat Stealth Bomber. Or I think that the Bat Stealth Bomber is more of a recommendation for the newer player, because it gives you a lot more time to control the screen. And we'll get into a little bit about screen control in here. But as you're spending the majority of your time at the bottom, you have a little bit more time to deal with and anticipate your shots versus move around. So being able to control the screen with your shots and minimize the amount of enemies on the screen is easier to do than to do some fancy flying around the screen and try and destroy everything that way.
I definitely went for the Stealth Bomber somewhere around maybe the halfway point during the month. I decided I was frustrated. I was struggling with the chopper. I wasn't doing enough damage, and I was having issues with, just dying too much and not getting where I wanted to be. So then I finally went to the B2 Bomber, and I found once it was fully powered up with that wide spread shot, you cover a lot of ground, you take out a lot of popcorn enemies, and you really have a lot more ability to do crowd control. Now, that compensates for not being able to zip around the screen like you can with the plane, but I felt like that was a good compromise, because that is kind of how I like to play a lot of old school shmups anyway, is give me a wide shot or something that's got a lot of range or firepower to it, so I can clear the field and then move around on the screen where I know I need to be in order to either take on a larger enemy or avoid an obstacle or whatever it is. And I felt like the Bomber, for me at least, was the best option to do that.
What struck me interesting about this game is it sort of follows what would be established as the cave guidelines. I feel like stage 1 you get through pretty quickly. Stage 2 it ramps up the difficulty a little bit, but stage 3 is sort of like, okay, well, you've seen enough of this game. We've got your quarter already. You got some time. Get off the machine.
Yeah,
it really ramps up the difficulty there. And if you die in stage 3 and you're left with the pea shooter, you better have that bomber, because it's going to cause you some pain if you don't. That's one of my complaints about this game, is nothing times out. If you are fighting a boss with a pea shooter, holy smokes, talk about just long playtime.
Yeah. I will say one addendum to that is there's one thing that times out, and it's the final boss. And I'll get to I'll get to that a little bit later.
I do have to also say, in the game's credit, it does strike me a little bit of having a little bit of the Rising style, where if anyone plays and remembers the short levels of Strikers in 1945, the levels are short.
Oh, you mean Psycho?
No, I was referring. Strikers 1945.
Yeah, that's Psycho.
Oh, Psycho. I'm sorry. All right. Coffee break. No. So yes. No, Strikers 94, where it has just short enough levels. I like that design element of it, but it's the bosses themselves sort of wear down the game because you spend maybe a good couple minutes, if that, you're through the stage. But when you get to that boss, if you're not powered up enough, you're just slogging it through.
Yep. So the game uses a standard 2-button configuration. 1 button fires your main and secondary weapons, and the thing with this game is holding down the button will make it auto-fire, but when you're in auto-fire and the button is held down, the grids will move around your craft and change positions, depending on where you move. So if you move your craft upward on the screen while holding the fire button down, the grids will kind of slide around to the side and eventually behind your craft. And again, if you then hold the fire button down and move downward on the screen, they'll kind of slide around to the side and then move up top in front of your craft again. And so it's something that you have to get used to. So if you want to have auto fire engaged and not move the grids around, you either need to hang out at the bottom of the screen or just get used to tapping the button a lot for shooting the weapon.
Yeah, this is something I would have loved to have, like in the later, when Sarah Flesh talked about in the latest Studio Prince review of the expansion for Rolling Gunner. Can you imagine if this had 2 analog sticks, one for moving, you're playing one for controlling the grid?
Oh, wow. That would be interesting.
I mean, that would be a beautiful control, but of course this is way too early for that type of stuff.
Sure. Or even a 3rd button so that you could have auto fire but without moving the grids, or have a dedicated grid button, have an auto fire button where you could tap the button for fire or hold it down for auto fire, have a bomb button, and then have a grid button so that when you hold the grid button down, whether you're auto fire or not, you can move the grids back and forth. And I know that was a thing that was discussed during the course of the month that we'll get into later. Now, of course, the other button is your bomb button, and that will release a bomb from your stock, assuming you have some. As you mentioned before, the grids work in similar fashion to the force bits in the R-Type series of the Force Pod, where they can block some enemy fire, but not all, and they will deal damage to enemies when they come into contact with them. Not only that, but the grids will collect bullets, and then that fills a meter at the bottom of your screen. There's a POW meter. And when that meter fills up, you get an additional bomb in your stock.
Sorry, one thing I want to add in here is the bullets that you collect have to be pink, which is interesting. I think, to my knowledge, it's the first example we have of pink bullets in shmups.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it's BC or before Cave.
Right. Yeah, I was asking around in a couple of the other shmup discords if there were any other known games prior to Donpachi that had this pink bullet situation where they were very bright, defined pink bullets that were easy to see on screen, and no one else could come up with an example. That's not definitive, of course, but this is the earliest example that I'm aware of that has those pink bullets. But your maximum bomb stock is 4, and once you have 4 bombs, you can still feel the meter again after stocking a 4th bomb, and that factors into the scoring, which we'll mention later. Some enemies will drop P icons, the letter P, to power up your primary and secondary weapons. You can increase your power level up to 7 times, and then, of course, collecting the P icons also appears to increase the game's rank, which makes things marginally more difficult, though it doesn't seem to increase it at the difficulty level of some later games, like those from Cave and Rising. So you're not going to be dealing with Battle Garega style rank or anything like that, but I did notice that it was a little bit more difficult, and things got a little bit more hectic once you were more powered up. Other enemies will drop a letter G icon that is to power up your grid. That changes in color every few seconds, and that'll determine the type of secondary weapon or fire that you have, as well as the bomb that you drop.
Now, really quick with this, when the enemies are destroyed and a G icon is dropped, it almost always goes to the upper portion of the screen. And that's something that is very different than stuff, because it's almost always putting yourself in immediate danger on there. When you're controlling the screen, for the most part, on Grid Seeker, you're controlling the bottom half of the screen. The enemies will, for the most part, all come from the top. So anytime you have to go up in there, not only if you're firing and you're moving up, your grids are going to move to the bottom, which means you're not going to be catching enemy fire, or you stop and then you just go straight up and not fire at there where you're trying to collect and power up. The risk of collecting and power up in this game is much higher than any other shmup I've played.
Yeah, and one thing to note then, when the power-ups drop, yeah, they start to move up toward the screen, but then they kind of curve back around, and they make a wider path every time. So it's almost like a coil, sort of like the Dreamcast logo, where it starts out in the middle, and then sort of coils out slowly, and then that gets bigger, and then it gets bigger again, and then eventually, after it makes a third or fourth pass, I don't remember right off the top of my head, but then when it goes back around to the bottom and then up toward the top of the screen, it'll eventually fly away. There are 4 different colors for the grids. The default is pink, which you're equipped with at the start of the game, and whenever you shoot down an enemy that drops a G icon, it will always start as pink. You fire a twin laser burst that fires forward, and then your bomb is a large explosion that sort of radiates out from its central position for a little bit and destroys all enemy bullets that are incoming, or all enemy fire. The blue G icon equips your craft with a similar forward-firing projectile, similar to the pink, but a little bit wider. And then also, its bomb is a dual laser that shoots forward. It does not necessarily clear enemy fire, but you do get the added effect of when the laser fires, there's sort of a flash effect that happens on the left and right side of your craft that will take out enemies or damage enemies that happen to be on the sides. So it's useful for that. The green G icon will give you a homing shot as the secondary weapon, and so it sort of sends out these green blobs, for lack of a better term, or little green clouds or whatever, that shoot out. Those do not clear enemy fire, at least by themselves, but when you deploy a bomb, it creates this sort of green cloud snake thing that goes around all over the screen, which does clear enemy fire, but its behavior pattern is a little bit unpredictable. I found it doesn't quite follow the same path everywhere because it sort of acts as a homing weapon, and so it just kind of tries to sort of home in on stuff as it flies around the screen. Very useful in a couple of areas in the game. And then finally, the orange weapon equips you with a repeating bomb drop that kind of creates a small area of effect explosion in front of your craft. And then the bomb is essentially a larger version of that creates this big explosive orb that lasts for a few seconds, though I did not find that it effectively cleared enemy fire. So be careful when you use that bomb that you can't just panic bomb with that, because it doesn't always clear that away. There's also in stages 1, 3, 5, and possibly 7, I was not able to determine that, there's at least one enemy in each of those stages that will yield the H icon, which assigns a helper craft to you. In the first and fifth stage, it will spawn a helicopter, and then in stage 3, you get a special bomber plane. When you grab the H icon, usually the helper's entrance will be accompanied by a flurry of missiles to help you clear the screen of some enemies. And then also the Helpercraft have limited HP, but they can take a fair amount of damage before they retreat. The other thing to note with those is they kind of sort of follow you around the screen, and if you retreat all the way to the back of the screen, they'll move forward and take the brunt of the damage, but they won't last as long. So if you want them to last a little bit longer, you'll need to fly further up the screen so that you're ahead of them, and then kind of creep back down a little bit so that they're toward the bottom of the screen, and that way they're providing additional fire, but you can still try and catch as many bullets and things with the grids as possible to help your helper last longer, so that they can help you longer. Oh, yes. The other thing I wanted to note was, and I noticed this, I thought it was a glitch or some kind of RNG, but I was able to correlate this throughout the month, that for enemies that will specifically drop power-up icons, if you kill that enemy with the grids because they cause damage, or you do enough damage with the grids prior to killing the enemy, they will not drop the power-up. So they have to be shot-killed in order to drop those power-ups, which I thought was interesting, and definitely something to note if you want to tackle this game.
All right, well, we're going from power-ups to powerful graphics. Let's take a look.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the look of this game. I thought it was very early 90s. It reminded me of a lot of Konami's output at the time. It just has that distinct style. And it would really, well, in my opinion, it would really look well on the Super Nintendo had a conversion. You could have done something neat with the parallax effects with Mode 7 possibility, and it would have stood out as one of the better shmups on the system.
I think if you compare Gridseeker to a couple of the other, I'll say, vertical military style shmups that were on the Super Nintendo at the time, such as Strike Gunner STG, or D-Force, or even something like Acrobat Mission, which we never got in North America. This game if it had a good conversion on the Super NES, probably would have blown those games out of the water. And yeah, I think, like you said with the Mode 7, I really think that the canyon or the cliffside effect that you see in Stage 2, it's possible that they could have approximated that somehow with Mode 7 and really made something impressive with that. Now, I don't know how much of that they could have done, but it might have been enough to translate the game reasonably well to the hardware.
The other part that stood out to me was the tanks were actually making tracks in the sand. I forget if it's Stage 4 or maybe Stage 5. The big tank boss, as it's following you, trying to get a shot at you, you can see it's making dynamic tracks in the sand, and you sort of get that effect with some of the smaller tanks. Sure,
and there's other cool effects in it too, like when some of the enemies blow up, it's not just an explosion, but some of the enemies also, the craft makes shrapnel that kind of flies out. It's pretty scripted, but it looks cool. Or things like when you shoot down enemy planes and helicopters, you'll see the little parachutes. Guys with parachutes come out, and they're real small, and then they sort of swing around a little bit and get smaller as they go down. And so a lot of nice little details like that really give the game a lot of visual pizzazz. But it's a lot more colorful and a lot more stylized than I think a lot of the other military shoot 'em ups at the time. I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Vapor Trail. I think stylistically, okay. It's not unlike that game. Those would be kind of in a similar conversation in terms of military style vertical shooters that are sort of distinct and have a little bit of their own flavor. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Not to say that it's all rosy, though there are some stuff that, in my opinion, I think yours as well, could have been done a little bit better. the enemies, some of the shots from the enemies, majority of them were pink, but the ones that were not were a little hard to see because it does fly through a lot of stuff very fast.
Yeah, I mean, like the homing missiles and some of the rockets.
Yes.
You know, it's a little bit of a contrast because you've got these bright pink bullets that, yeah, let's collect those with the grids, and those are kind of unrealistic. And then you have things like the Stage 2 boss with the giant orange orbs and then the pink bullets from the turrets and things, and that's all easy to see. But then you've got these really skinny, tiny little missiles and rockets that get shot at you, and those are much more realistic looking in contrast, and with everything else being so colorful and those being kind of gray and drab, they sort of just disappear a little bit. So they get that you have to anticipate them and know that they're coming, or otherwise you can easily fall prey to one of those, especially because a lot of them will move very quickly.
Especially those rockets that are fired; those things move extremely fast. All right. Anything else on the graphics?
No, I mean, I just think for early Taito F3 hardware, they really created some neat effects. The cliffside in Stage 2 is impressive. So
yeah, and I have to say, going back to the Super Nintendo, if not the Super Nintendo, and I understand why this wasn't done, but this would have been really cool to see it properly done on the Saturn.
Oh yeah.
When the Saturn was getting everything on here, and it feels like with everything this game does, this game is that it feels like with 1992 here, we're at a sort of a tipping point or a historical junction for shmups. It could have gone, Danmaku is just sort of beginning here. We've got Batsugan. It would have been interesting to see an alternate timeline where this type of shmup, the traditional shmup, went on and Danmaku sort of became the subgenre.
Yeah, and I mean this is right before you started to see the rise of Psycho and Rising and kind of the transition from the traditional shmup, which this would still be considered, into that more manic style that kind of became the transitional period before Cave really brought things in with the realistically Dodonpachi. Donpachi is manic, but it's kind of proto Bullet Hell or Danmaku. But I think Dodonpachi really kicked that off. So this kind of serves as one of the shmups that was part of that sort of last gasp of shoot 'em ups that was hectic, but it wasn't super hectic, at least not as compared with some of what came later prior to moving and the genre kind of going full Danmaku.
Now, do you believe that's just because of the way that arcades were going at the time, or what's your take on it?
I don't know. I mean, part of it I think it might have been that as more of these games started to come out, because it was a popular genre for a little while, as more and more of these games came out, my assumption is that arcade or developers started to do things like the grid mechanic and that to kind of throw a new gimmick at the game and try to get people to try it because it was something different. But there were too many people probably that were too good at these games to where arcade operators started to see less and less return. And so as the diminishing returns kind of was happening, then developers had to start doing more interesting things with the games, which is then why you started to see things like Psycho designing these games that, the first 4 stages are going to be different every time, so you're going to have to be on your toes and spend a lot more money if you want to see more of the game. Or again, later with the Danmaku games where, stage 1's not going to be too bad. Stage 2, we're going to make things pretty difficult. And then stage 3, you're going to hit a wall. And so, I think we looked at Ketsui, which was a decade after this, and there was such a paradigm shift with the genre within this kind of 10-year span that happened between there. almost halfway between there. So it really was a very interesting transition that happened very shortly after this came out, where things started to get, the games started to get crazier, they started to get harder, and they started to cater more toward that hardcore audience rather than trying to go for a wider appeal.
And to back this up, I would say that the wider appeal was starting to go more towards the one-on-one fighting game, because in February 1991, Street Fighter II came out.
Yep.
And that took the world by storm. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to the people who will play the hardcore players who will play the shmup. So the people who are really good. So you have to come up with rank to make sure that you get your quarters still and it makes money. And it's a really interesting dynamic to see how the arcade scene was changing from, because you have, let's say, from the beginning 80s, you have the proto shmups with stuff like Galaga, Galaxian, and Phoenix. You have a whole bunch of stuff within there. Then it sort of stops for a little bit, and then within the, let's say 1985 until 89, you start to get a lot more of the shmups. We have Gradius 3 at the tail end with Gradius number 1 at 1985. You start to get, I don't know, maybe the golden age or the old guard. I'm trying to think of when R-Type came out around that time. R-Type was one of the...
I think it was 88.
88, okay. So you have a lot of the old guard in there, and then either way, it's still within the time frame between Gradius 1 and Gradius 3. So you have the decline of the old guard of the shmups, the way that it used to be. You had the rise of the Danmaku, and then you have Street Fighter 2 or the one-on-one fighter taking over the arcades. Because I think prior to that, in like 1988 or 89, you have Yayar Kung Fu, which isn't going to get too many people excited. Of course, he has the Street Fighter 1 in 87. But the other one I was thinking of is Karate Champ, and I can't think of a date for that. I think Karate Champ is 88, maybe?
Oh, it's got to be earlier than that.
Earlier than that, you think? You think 86 or something like that? But anyways, it's an interesting time of transition when one-on-one fighters were taking over and Street Fighter 2 was king of the arcade. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you just see Grid Seeker as being pushed or relegated to an also-ran in a genre that was fading away from the limelight.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the sound, based on my playtime, I would say that the sound effects are pretty standard fare for shmups of the time, but they fit. So there's nothing bad about the sound effects, but also nothing that really stands out as either annoying or really awesome. I just think everything fits well for the game, and that's about all I can say for the sound effects. The music, on the other hand, I actually quite liked a bit of that. That was, of course, done by Zuntata, which is Taito's in-house band. And one thing I noted here in our notes was that there's an interesting cadence to the tracks. Stage 1 is very upbeat, there's a lot of energy, and the boss theme kind of reflects that. And then Stage 2 has a very somber, downbeat kind of feel, and then the boss theme has this real minimalist approach with kind of a weird tonality to it that Zuntata would sort of capitalize on later in the decade with games like G. Darius or Ray Crisis and things like that. And then Stage 3, right back to upbeat, very catchy, and the boss theme is intricate and catchy and almost happy sounding. And so it's a really interesting kind of back and forth with the music. What about you? What did you think of the music in the game?
I thought the music was fantastic. It was definitely something that I would listen to, and I'm sure that the fact that they've made several copies of the soundtrack available is a testament to its longevity. It really didn't feel grating at any one point, no matter how many times I was playing through stage 3. It just stuck with me, and I really like the boss theme. It feels very dramatic.
Yeah. The stage 3 boss theme, I absolutely love that. And I really like the first stage music, and I like the stage 3 music. And then, of course, the stage 1 music repeats again in stage 4. But, I really think overall the music is quite good. I will say there are mixed opinions on stage 2 and the stage 2 boss theme. If you want to see Duke Togo get PTSD, just mention Grid Seeker stage 2 and listen to him shudder, because he mentioned that several times when he was watching me stream the game, that he was not a fan of that music. But there was 2 different CD releases for the soundtrack. In 1993, they put out one, and the credits that I found is that the music was composed by Norihiro Furukawa, and then the arrangement was from Tamayo Kawamoto, who was former Capcom, and then the performance of the music was by Shuji Nakamura. And then in 1999, funny enough, the year the game is set in, they put out Grid Seeker, The Dictator of Justice, which is an arranged soundtrack. So again, the same compositions by Norihiro Furukawa, but this time arranged and performed by Hideyuki Daiichi Suzuki. And then, as of this recording, both the original soundtrack with a slight change and the Dictator of Justice arrangement are available on Apple Music. But the digital version of the original OST does not have the voice sample collection that was contained on the original CD version. So if you really want the voices, like Power Up and those kinds of things, you'll have to buy the CD.
Yeah, there's nothing memorable in there for a voice collection, like the Gravity Bomba. So I think it's better to just buy the digital in this case.
It's probably cheaper.
Definitely. Just a quick addition here. Yayar Kung Fu came out in January of 1985, and Karate Chant came out in 1984. So we're talking right the year before Gradius and right pretty close to the time that Gradius came out. So pretty early one-on-one fighters.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to scoring. You can get score from, well, destroying enemies, as well as an end stage bonus for the number of enemies you take down. Pretty standard fare.
Yeah, and one thing that I forgot to note is the end stage bonus for the number of enemy kills that you have. That is cumulative. So as you go through the game, the number of enemies that you've taken out adds up per level. So, the first level, if you defeat 70 enemies, let's say, and then you get to the second level and it says you defeated 150, well, that means you've defeated 150 total, but the bonus carries over, so it builds upon itself for every level that you complete.
Very nice. Alright, so your bomb stock also plays a role in the end stage score bonus as well. No bombs at the end of the stage means, well, no points. 1 bomb at the end of the stage equals 1,000 points. 2 bombs equal 3,000 points. And 3 bombs equal 10,000 points. 4 bombs equal 20,000 points. And 4 bombs plus a full meter at the end stage equals 50,000 points.
Right. So yeah, 4 bombs by itself is 20k, but if you have 4 bombs and a full meter, then it's the 50k. And that's where the real money's at in terms of scoring.
If your helper craft, which again is the stages, let's see, it was 2...
No, it's the 1, 3, 5, and then
3.
possibly
Okay.
7.
Even on there, which the ones that I've seen have always been helicopters
Right.
for the helper craft. If your helper craft is still alive when the boss is defeated, you automatically receive a 50k point bonus special at the end of the stage. P icons are worth 1,000 points for each collected beyond the maximum. But G icons, however, are worth no additional points.
Right. And the one thing I forgot to say is I want to say it's something like 100 points. It's either 100 points or 1,000 points. I wish I wrote this down. I apologize. But that's the per enemy bonus that you get. And so I think it's 100 points. So it doesn't sound like much. So when you get, say, 70 kills in the first level or whatever, that's 7,000 points. But again, since it's cumulative, as you go along in the later stages, that just adds up. So obviously, the more enemy kills you get, not only do you get the initial points, but then you also get that added effect on top of it with the cumulative bonus.
I have to say, trying to get with a full stock of bombs and then having the meter full is really hard to do. This game's bosses are bullet sponges, and the whole idea is so that you get that sweet pink bullet candy in order to fill up your bomb meter, but then you need to use the bomb meter in order to destroy the bosses, otherwise you're going to be sitting there for the next hour just pecking away at the boss's health bar.
Yeah, that's one of the many things in this game that, we kind of hinted at it at the top of the show, but I think this game is one of those that really does hit on a lot of things. It has good graphics, it has some good design, it's got good music, it's got solid sound effects, it's got the cool grid mechanic, which is kind of fun, but it doesn't. I think it misses the mark in a few areas, just enough to kind of take it down a few notches to where it doesn't belong in the upper echelon of arcade shmups or vertical shooters from this era, where I think one of the things is it's really lopsided in terms of the scoring. You don't get that many points from killing enemies during the stage, and the bonus, like I said, is not that much until you get 4 or 5 stages in, where you get that cumulative bonus, and all of a sudden, I've got 350 enemy kills, and so now I've got, say, 30,000, 35,000 points that I get at the end of the stage. But that 50,000 bonus for beating the boss and having your full bomb stock and the full meter really comes into play. And as I said, that's where the real money's at. And so that is where it almost makes me wonder if this is one of those early games during the course of shoot-'em-ups where it kind of encourages that sort of no miss, no bomb sort of mentality that started to come out later, especially with some of the cave shoot-'em-ups and things like that. But it almost seems antithetical, because the grid mechanic, by gathering the pink bullets, fills your bomb stock. So in a way, the game is encouraging you to bomb because, well, you can just fill it up again by collecting bullets. And there are going to be plenty of opportunities to do that during the course of the level, especially if, instead of destroying everything the instant it comes on screen, you let it come on screen long enough to shoot some bullets at you, and then take it out because you've got the grids there to collect those and help protect you against, the basic small bullets. So you've got this mechanic that is encouraging you to stock bombs and use bombs, but then you have a conflicting scoring mechanic that at the end of the level is encouraging you not to use those bombs. So to me, it feels like you have to strike a balance by either collecting enough bullets and filling that stock up early so that you can maybe use a bomb to ensure that you're taking out a heavier group of enemies or something like that, and then hopefully gathering enough bullets either from the last few enemies in the level or from the boss itself to be able to then have that meter be full by the time you get to the end so that you can take advantage of that bonus. So it's a little bit of a delicate balance, and I don't think it quite works as well as it could. Some of the later boss fights, such as in Stage 4 and Stage 5, where the bosses throw a ton of bullets at you, gives you the opportunity to, on every kind of repeat of its pattern, you could throw a bomb and then gather a bunch of bullets and basically refill what you just deployed and just keep kind of rinse and repeat with those. And that's what I kind of learned to do with Stage 4, especially, and Stage 5. So you can kind of play with that enough to where, use some bombs and get through the first pattern and then get kind of midway through the second pattern to where, okay, I've deployed a bomb, now I need to not use a bomb and just dodge stuff so I can gather the bullets and make sure I've got a full meter prepared so that then I can go back and get this bonus. So I don't think it's as elegant as it ought to be in order for the game to work as well as I think it could. I think if the sound effects were a little bit more distinct, or if I understand why they went with a 2-button, because that was still very common at that time. Most of these were not probably dedicated cabinets at this point by 1992. Most of them were conversion cabinets, or people were buying kits so that they could swap out the board with another F3 board, or something else that was going to have a similar JAMA type adapter or what have you. And so, yeah, there were probably a lot of 2-button cabinets out there that were, at that point, you could almost say the legacy hardware. And so instead of having to buy a new cabinet for that, because you had all kinds of 2-button cabinets, then you had your MVS cabinets, which were 4 buttons, and then you had the new stuff that was coming up, things like Mortal Kombat, which was unique and had 5, or Street Fighter 2, which had 6, and sort of became a standard over time. But yeah, since it only had the 2 buttons, you also lose out on either the single fire and rapid fire, or just make it rapid fire instead of making people tap the button to death, and then have a dedicated grid button where you can move the grids around independently of your fire, and that would give you a lot more granular and fine control over the grids. I found myself only a couple of times during the course of the game really utilizing the ability to move the grids around and behind me, particularly on the Stage 2 boss, where there's one moment where after a few volleys of bullets, I would quickly kind of sweep up and to the right, and the grids would swing behind me, and that would block a few incoming bullets before the big orange orbs would come out, and they could sweep by, and then I could quickly kind of sweep back down, move the grids out in front of me again, and keep pelting it with fire. But other than that, and a couple of other instances where, I was kind of doing it in a reaction manner, I mostly either just tapped the button and, didn't have auto fire, or I would hold the button down in sections where I knew I could kind of just slide left and right a little bit and I didn't have to move up or down, so then I didn't have to worry about the grids moving. Otherwise, I was tapping the button for fire all the time. And I think as we started to move towards games that implemented things like auto fire more commonly, it was a little bit of a missed opportunity for Taito.
For me, the interesting thing with is that the JAMA standard, when it came out in 1985, of course, there wasn't going to be a lot that used it. But here we are in 1990, and the JAMA standard by default allows for 3 buttons. Anything more than that, you're going to need special wiring, which is interesting that they only use 2. So this makes it a design choice to use 2 buttons.
Sure.
The other thing that sort of surprised me with some of this, and is especially prevalent with the Stage 3 boss, is it feels a bit cartoonish in some ways for a militaristic shooter. When the boss comes out, the submarine boss comes out, it sort of feels like a Looney Tunes cartoon with Elmer Fudd and Bugs, or more, I would say, akin to Yosemite Sam and Bugs Bunny, where one brings out a gun, and then, of course, then Bugs brings out an even bigger gun, and it just keeps escalating until someone's got a cannon and a battleship.
Right.
Where that thing just keeps bringing out guns, and guns just growing larger and larger. It's not quite taking itself seriously, which I appreciate. It's being a little bit silly. You sort of have to with pink bullets and some stuff on there, but to me it does a good job, but it's just quite a little bit off balance, where it doesn't hit all the marks it would be for to fire on all cylinders. And just as you had stated earlier, the scoring system being in line to, hey, we're going to give you this thing, and this entire thing is so that way you can get bombs, so that way you can take out the bosses. But you know what? On second thought, don't use it.
Yeah. Like, oh, by the way, those bombs that you've been stocking, yeah, don't use those, or otherwise your score is going to be crap. It's self-defeating, and I think it hampers the game and keeps it from being something that we could elevate a little bit higher up. The other thing, to dovetail on what you were talking about with the sort of cartoonish look, I think you're right, because it's so bright and colorful, and, you got the pink bullets, and you've got some fairly fantastical enemies, like I can't call it a spider because it's only got 4 legs, but the big mech with 2 giant cannons on it in the first stage, and then the second stage, this sort of flying thing with these big arms that come out that are loaded up with turrets and everything. It's all very interesting and looks cool, and it's very fantastical. But compared to other military shooters at the time, probably looked a little bit more like, this is kind of the halfway point between fantasy anime military stuff and, what you would get with a more traditional, straight-laced military game. So it really walks the line between the two, but it doesn't really lean too hard in one direction or the other. It ends up being, I don't know, interesting, but not as interesting as it could be.
I think where it takes it to the full anime effect, and you see a lot of these designs fully realized, is in Einhander.
Sure.
I could see a lot of the spider element on there. You see those a lot in Stage 4 in Einhander. It's something that will be walking across the water, or the little, maybe as a prototype for the spider. I think that was still the beginning of Stage 4. With the spider, remember the one that always would fire at an angle on there, and you had to constantly maneuver and then caught fire?
Yep.
At the end. You see a lot of these designs in here that have the anime influence or fantastical influence that you could sort of see. And around this time too, you're starting to get stuff like Ghost in the Shell, so you could definitely see the influence there.
Right. Yeah, I just think it just barely misses the mark in enough areas that it's solid, but it doesn't do enough to kind of get beyond that.
Yeah, and again, as we talked about earlier, it doesn't. The problem with getting attention for somebody is you have to be really good or you have to be really bad. If you're in the middle, you're not going to be very memorable, and I think that's exactly what happened with the shmup and why we don't see very many people know about it, very many people talk about it.
Sure. Right now, the only port that's been made available was on Taito Legends 2, which came out on the PS2, and then on the Xbox, but only in Europe for some reason. And then it was on one of the Taito Memories collections that was also on PS2. Otherwise, the only way to play this game is in MAME. It's not even in RetroArch. And so, even though I have Taito Legends 2 on PS2, I spent most of the month playing it in MAME just because I don't have a good controller for PS2 that I like, and I'm becoming used to playing on the arcade stick since I was doing that with Otomedius and with Ketsui. So I just kept going and was playing it in MAME just so I could use the nice stick and also, have the better graphics and stuff, because when I first started playing the PS2 version, the aspect ratio was all squished, and I didn't realize that you could change that. And then during the course of the month, one of the players actually mentioned, hey, in the very first menu in the game, you can go in and set it to show or display in the original aspect ratio. So even though it's a 480i image coming out of your PS2, it will at least show the game in, the original vertical mode and look reasonably good for a 480i picture.
But it's still not in Tate, if I remember right. I don't think we ever found a way to do Tate on there. Yeah, that's what you were able to do with the main version, is you were able to do Tate there.
Yeah, I mean, on my 55-inch TV that I've got in the living room, sending the PS2 through my OSSC, it was still a reasonably sized picture. It was easy to see, but of course it's an interlaced signal. So even with the Bob deinterlace that the OSSC does, it still doesn't look fantastic. And using the rather lousy joystick that I have for PS2 also was not a great experience. And so ultimately that's why I decided to mostly play MAME, because then I could actually run that. I've got a Tate monitor that I have in my setup that's right in front of me. And so I ran the game on that, and then I had my streaming software and chat and stuff over on the TV. And then that way, I had the proper aspect ratio. I could size the window how I wanted it and make it look as big or small as fit my tastes. And, I could kind of do that. And that just made more sense for me.
There you go with what works.
Yep.
All right. Now that we've given a little bit of our impressions of the game, let's take a look at the community. We have from Saturday Development. I never heard of this title, but looking forward to playing it. Count me in. Well, I hope my Xbox still works. Later post. This isn't an impressive score. I'm not even the top scorer of the default scores, but wanted to get things started. 323,720 on easy. I can get to level 4 consistently, but things typically end there, and level 4 is nothing to sneeze at there. As we mentioned previous, level 3 is where things sort of start to get a little hard, especially trying to get past that boss.
Yes.
Later post, he writes, I like having the green homing grid for the main levels, then switching over to the blue laser for the bosses. Red's fine, and I just can't use yellow. I find the continual explosion it puts out to be too distracting and interferes with the visuals of the fire bullets on some of the bosses. Of course, I'm always going for a green power-up, and switches to yellow at the last minute.
Huh.
I hate it too, especially when you're going down the highway and it goes from green to yellow. Jeez, no. I totally, you get on there, you get really close, you're making way up the screen, or as the power-up's going on the spiral and it changes to a different color, always gets annoying. That's probably one thing that we should add into. It would have been nice, instead of changing colors on its own, if it reacted to the shot of your ship. So if you fire it, and then it would change colors so you could cycle it yourself.
Sure.
In a later post, he writes, I just found out there's an option in the Taito Legends 2 menu that lets you play in the original aspect ratio. In the game screen, select the default option, which will bring you to a settings menu, and then you can change it in the video settings, which was very helpful for me. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Later on, he writes, not sure if this helps, but here are some tips on how I managed to defeat the level 1 boss and take it out pretty quick and reliable. I try to bring the helper copter with me to help out with firepower, plus you get a bonus for finishing the level with the helper intact. Picking up the H as late as possible helps me keep things going. The main things to dodge with the level 1 boss are the fireballs. The first 2 fireball attacks I avoid by swinging far right, then far left, trying to get as many shots in between. After the first 2 attacks, I just pepper the core of the boss. Alright, shoot the core! as hard as possible with fire. The next 2 fireball attacks can be dodged in the lower middle of the screen, but it takes a little bit of reaction skill to do so. I find the boss typically doesn't last longer than these attacks. If there's an easy way to pull the video off my Xbox, I post a video and hope the above helps. Well, thank you for the strategy tips. Later on, he's answering a post from Easy Racer. Check your instructions. I'm using the Xbox version of Taito Legends 2, and the right trigger auto-fires without moving the grids. If you use A, and then the grids move, when you move, which I've never been able to properly control. Moving those is a pain. I think it was, these days it would have just done dual analog control sticks, which would be great for that type of thing. And as we talked about earlier, Rolling Gunner, the expansion really does a great job with it. I'm not quite certain how you would add this within a 3-button JAMA setup. I think they did the best that they could do with this idea and the options to them at the time.
Yeah, they'd have to go full Robotron.
I agree that if I had buttons to control the grid movement, I would use them more. However, I tend to keep them just out directly in front. And I think that they designed the game around that, expecting most people to be playing shmup on.
Yeah, and the interesting thing to note here, too, is the Xbox version of Taito Legends 2 had that option where you could do auto-fire with the shoulder button, because on the original Xbox controller, of course, you just had the shoulder buttons, and then you had the 4 main face buttons, and then the black and white buttons. So the shoulder buttons you could use as an auto-fire, which may have been done because there were so many Halo players and people used to that kind of convention that it was being developed for first-person shooters, but that did not translate to the PlayStation 2 port. So, for whatever reason, they added that for the European Xbox release, but we didn't get that in the North American PS2 release. So neither the L1, L2, R1, or R2 buttons, as far as I was able to tell, will produce that auto-fire without moving the grids. So I think that's exclusive to just the Xbox version.
Oh, that's a pretty cool fact. Alright, so his final thoughts. Grid Seeker is a hidden gem. Uh-oh. Huh. Be careful on saying that too many times, you may summon Metal Jesus. I had never heard of it before this playthrough, but I'm glad I've checked it out. The grid system is a unique and fun way of managing bombs and defensive strategy. I was glad the scoring system was pretty straightforward, considering this was my first shot at a monthly playthrough. The soundtrack was excellent and a good variety of tracks. The tracks on level 3 and 5 were highlights for me. One other item of note is that Taito Legends 2 is a solid compilation of games. I like that they had 3D mock-ups of the arcade cabinets for each game, along with some marketing materials. I tried a few of the other shooters, but they paled in comparison to Grid Seeker. I did find that trying out other games after an intense round of Grid Seeker was a good way of cooling down. Yeah, I would definitely agree that the other shmups on here just weren't quite as good on there. I think that... Is it this one that has Metal Black, though?
Yeah, actually, I would have to disagree with Saturday Development on this one, because this compilation has Metal Black, it has Darius Gaiden, and it has Raystorm. So
those are all really good. And keep in mind that the Japanese one is there's like 6 of them or something like that, so they're not quite the same. But if it holds true, the PAL copy holds true to the USA release, I would have to agree with you, Fro, and say that Darius Gaiden and Metal Black and forgive me, I forgot the last one, but
yeah, Raystorm and
Raystorm.
I'm thinking about this now. The Xbox version is actually different. It does not have a couple of those games. Let me look real quick, because I know that the Xbox version is missing some games that are on the PlayStation version. So the Xbox version does not have Civilian. It does not have Raystorm, and it does not have G. Darius. It does have Rayforce, the first game in the Ray series, in place of Raystorm, which is also an excellent game. But yeah, it doesn't have Raystorm or G. Darius. So I could see how he might have thought that Gridstorm was better than, let's say, Gekiden Dawn or even Metal Black, perhaps, if that wasn't his style, or Gun Frontier. But we might have to talk to him about Rayforce, because doggone it, that's a great game.
Excuse me, sir, I respectfully disagree. No.
Yes.
So, would you like to take the comments from Zoido?
Sure. Zoido chimed in and said, "It's a cool game. I will be around and play some credits." And he posted later in the thread, directly at Saturday Development, he said, "I also switch between blue and green. Usually I try to play with the blue laser and try to switch to green at the beginning of Stage 3. It works nice with the enemies coming from behind and the sides, and it's also helpful at the boss fight." And then he specifically was saying to me, "It's a bit frustrating with the power-ups. I died several times trying to pick them up, especially when you got hit and try to power up fast to stand a chance at all. Things can get a bit hectical." And Zoido and Saturday Development and I had quite a bit of conversation on the game outside of the thread over in our Discord in the Shoot the Corecast channel there. So there was some really good discussion about the game that we had there in the Discord as well that didn't make it into the thread. So definitely, if you join us for a future playthrough, definitely want to make sure that you're in the Discord, if you can be, and then also on the forum so that you get in on all the action.
Sounds exciting. All right. Oh, we've got one from Easy Racer here. Borrowed TL2 from a friend. Now just have to get the PS2 set back up, and I understand. Getting something with 480i to work on a modern display is not easy these days.
Nope.
So I wasn't able to get started on Gridseeker until late last week. Spent a fair amount of time over the weekend with it. I really want to like this game. Interesting gameplay, fun mechanic with the grids and bullet collecting, solid graphics and sound, but so far I just haven't. I want to be able to shoot while moving my ship forward on the screen. I can't do that without moving the grids. Yeah, it's an interesting trade-off, and we talked about this earlier, but it's definitely one of the sticking points for this game. I just wish there was an easier way of controlling this. I'm not saying go full Smash TV on there, but it's something it need to be done in the control department to make you feel that you're doing more than playing shmup on it. I don't think even a rotary control would have helped out with that. Would have been weird if. Can you imagine having a maybe you've got your joystick in the left hand and a rotary control on the right to move that thing, or like a trackball?
Oh wow! Yeah,
that would have been really weird.
Yeah, you'd be watching people play Gridseeker. It'd be like watching someone play Sound Voltex right today.
Oh yeah. Oh. Well, I realize this is a direct port of an arcade game. Every game I find myself wishing the grids were controlled by the left and right triggers. I realize it's probably part of the challenge of the game to have the controls set up in this manner. But even then, basing the challenge on control gimmick rather than the natural flow of the game feels a bit artificial. And I have to agree on here. This is a gimmick-based game where it's cool, but it just doesn't flow as well as you get with R-Type. You feel that you'll always have control over the force pod, and it's your fault if you messed up. It just doesn't translate the same in this game. I probably just need to spend some more time getting used to it, but it seems like it would make the controls smoother and the game so much more accessible with this change. My best score is just under 120,000. I'm still struggling to consistently defeat the level 1 boss. No pics to post just yet. On a side note, playing it on a borrowed copy of Taito Legends 2, I'd never heard of Metal Black until I saw it right next to Grid Seeker on the game select screen. It's an interesting shmup as well, and I fully agree with Metal Black. It's one that not too many people have heard of, but there's a great version of it on the Japanese Saturn.
Indeed. So, looking at the high scores, since there were only the 4 participants, MetalFRO, myself, of course, Zoido, Saturday Development, and Easy Racer, that was kind of it for scoring. So I ended up with the high score on the game with 773,910 points. I was using the bomber, and I managed to reach stage 6. Saturday Development came in second with 452,860 points. And I think he said he was consistently hitting a wall in stage 4, so I don't know if he ever reached stage 5. I don't recall from our discussion on the Discord. And then Zoido hit 429,690, and again, I think maybe stage 4 was where he rounded out, and so that rounded out the top 3 on the scores.
Congratulations to all.
Yeah.
All right. So, I think we pretty much covered this already, but final thoughts are that it's a good game that could have been great, came at the tail end of what we would accept as the shmup golden, the original shmup, or what's the word I'm looking for, the classic shmup golden era.
Right.
There, it didn't quite do enough to define itself, so it's not really remembered. But if you ever have the chance to try it, definitely do so, because it's one that very few people have played, and it's worth at least experiencing. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to note, or a couple things I wanted to note. I mentioned it earlier, but the final boss, if you don't take the final boss out soon enough, it will time out. And I experienced this. The last night that I streamed it, I decided to do a double play. So I set the player 1 and player 2 controls exactly the same, so that I could just throw a bunch of credits at the game and then do the thing where, both of the things come on screen, you move them all back bottom left so that they converge, and then when you move them around, they're doing exactly the same thing. So I was doing that and trying to essentially use the added firepower to try and get through the game a little bit more easily. I found that it did help some, but by the time you get to the final stage, stage 7, things just get absolutely bananas. And unless you have that stage memorized and you know where everything's going to be and have the ability to take stuff out quickly, it's going to be really, really difficult. And that final boss, I managed to take out part of it, but I was credit feeding there at the end, and I was just underpowered. So it eventually flew away, and then I got the bad ending. So I watched a very skilled double play of the game earlier, and someone actually did a 1 credit clear, and actually technically a 1 life clear, or a 2 life clear, I guess, since it was 1 life for player 1 and 1 life for player 2, but essentially a no death run double play using the fighter plane on all the levels, and it was quite impressive. So I would recommend people check that out if they haven't already, because that's definitely worth watching. The other thing I wanted to note is there's a bit of a bug in the game, a graphical bug, where after you beat the stage 5 boss and it explodes, you will randomly have a small portion, or sometimes several portions, of the explosion from that boss that will linger on the screen through the score tally screen after the boss is gone, and then on through the rest of the game. And those little bits of explosion will sit there and flicker on screen, and will sometimes obstruct what you're trying to see in terms of enemies or bullets coming at you. And it's a really weird bug. And I was playing both on PS2 and on MAME. I had the most, I guess the newest iteration or most up-to-date iteration of the ROM that's been dumped. And when Saturday Development brought it to my attention in the Discord, he mentioned that he was playing on Xbox, of course, and he was credit feeding through it so he could see more of the game. And he noticed that too. And so that's a huge bug that Taito left in the game. And obviously someone from quality control either missed that or just ignored it, and the game went out the door that way. So it's kind of an interesting side note, and it could be one of the reasons that we haven't seen an arcade port of that game somewhere, because realistically you'd want to go back and fix that.
Well, maybe one day we'll see an arcade archives version of it that will have that fixed.
Possibly.
Would be nice.
Yeah.
And speaking of nice, what do we have coming next?
Well, as we record this, we are approaching the middle of March, which means if you are participating...
The Ides of March?
The Ides of March, yeah. You should already be playing alongside us with Gyruss for the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. And then coming up in April, we have the PC shoot-'em-up Steel Vampire, which was a Japanese doujin release and has been on Steam now for a couple of years from developer Akira Goya, and then released on Steam through publisher Henteco Dojin. So it's usually pretty reasonable to pick up on Steam and very inexpensive. So yeah, that one, I think the requirements for that one are pretty minimal as well, but it's $10 right now on Steam. So
yeah, I think it runs on a toaster.
Yeah, it runs on a potato computer. So yeah, definitely grab a copy of Steel Vampire if you have even a halfway decent PC, and come on and join us, because this looks interesting, and like Ketsui, it has a focus on point blanking enemies as one of its game mechanics. So yeah, if you want excitement, come join us.
All right. And speaking of what we're doing next year, I'd like to give a couple shout outs to Sarah Flash of Studio Mudprints / Bullet Heaven for the logo, Kogasu for the intro and outro music, everybody at RFGen Playcast and Collectorcast, as well as everybody who joined us. And we actually have forgot to mention this earlier, but we do have a NES challenge that is running on RFGem right now, where we're trying to beat all of the licensed NES games. It seems like it used to be within a year, so it looks like within 2 years.
Right.
And I also like to thank MetalFRO for all the streaming he does.
Thank you.
Chasing that Twitch money.
Well, yeah, I'm probably not going to see any of that. I kind of take the Forrest Gump approach. Yeah, there's all that Twitch money, but I ain't seen a nickel of that. So yeah, but that's okay. I'm doing it for the fun, and I enjoy streaming the shmups and playing those, and I'm sure there's a bit of schadenfreude as people get to watch me die repeatedly and learn the stages and learn the game, and so hey, it's fun for all.
Indeed. All right.
Well, if you'd like to connect with Shoot the Corecast, you can follow us on Twitter at ShootCorecast. You can follow me directly at GameBoyGuru. Make sure you join rfgeneration.com and join us for a Shmup Club playthrough. And also subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your preferred platform. We would greatly appreciate that. And if you do write a review for us, we will try to get that read in a future episode. Also, check out the RF Generation Discord channel, which is linked on the front page of rfgeneration.com, and come check out the dedicated Shoot the Corecast topic there, where we post screenshots and scores and discuss the games, and you can give us feedback on the podcast episodes, etc. And again, also follow me on Twitch. I am there on Twitch as Guru Game Boy, so twitch.tv/Guru Game Boy, and follow me there to get notifications of new streams and to watch me fail repeatedly at the Shmup of the Month and occasionally have a small victory.
If you are going to leave us a review on iTunes, please keep it to 5 swear words or less.
Yes, family friendly like the podcast would be appreciated.